All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Reform California online briefing on our campaign to pass what we call the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative. This is the most powerful weapon that we have seen in the fight against tax increases in California since 1978's Prop 13 initiative. And the effort to pass this in November of 2024 will take the same sort of grassroots taxpayer rebellion that we saw in the state in the 1970s. We will be talking about the campaign. We'll be talking about what the initiative actually does, how it will provide immediate relief to working families in California who are struggling with high taxes, high utility rates, why it helps restore election integrity because it restores honest ballot titles, and some of the other ways that we hope to use the initiative to have more transparency in government. We do have our campaign website with a full rundown of information for you to use and review. It's at stopcaliforniataxhikes.com, stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. And this presentation will be posted to that page after today's program. So let's get started. At the end of this session, we will take questions. You can ask a question by raising your hand in the Zoom app, and we'll call on you to ask your question. When we call on you, please unmute yourself so that we can hear you. If you're on the phone, just hit *9 to raise your hand, and you'll hear a tone when you've been called upon. Of course, if you would like to use the chat box throughout the presentation to pose questions when it's at the top of your mind, type in your question, and we will read those questions at the end and cover those rapid fire. Finally, if your question's not addressed or if you think of one later on, please reach out to us at info@reformcalifornia.org. That's info@reformcalifornia.org. So let's jump into it. California taxes are already unsustainably high. We have the highest income tax in the country, the highest sales tax in the country, the highest property taxes. When you consider the valuation of our property, our residents actually are paying, despite Prop 13, some of the highest property tax assessments in the country, the highest gas tax, the highest car tax. And the Sacramento politicians are still not done raising our taxes. They continue to say they need more and more of our money for their unsustainable spending. If you could back up real quick, if you could back up real quick, there we go. Nope, back up. Thanks. The taxes that we see coming down the pike are going to be directly addressed by the passage of the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative. We know statewide that Sacramento politicians are going to try to impose a mileage tax on top of the car tax and the gas tax. We know that. They're already doing it in San Diego as a pilot project, and we're fighting it down here. But they are looking to add on top the gas tax and the car tax a new mileage tax. And it's not just to get our money. They want to punish us for driving cars. There's also a proposal in the legislature to impose a savings tax. I know, you work hard, you pay your income taxes, and then suddenly the politicians come along and impose a savings tax on top of that. They say that it's only going to hit the wealthy first, but as soon as they do a savings tax, just like the income tax when it was passed in the 1910s, they will eventually expand it to everybody. They have a health tax. It would be a doubling of California tax burden for a government-run healthcare system. They're looking at an exit tax that says that even if you move out of the state of California, you would still be paying taxes every single year back to the state of California because you exited the state. Not only do we think that's unconstitutional, but again, they are looking at every damn way to tax us. But also, we have to consider stealth taxes. Recently, we released a report at the Transparency Foundation. They released a report showing $4.5 billion in hidden state taxes added to your electric and gas utility rates. Those stealth taxes are directly addressed in the initiative that we have. So let's go to our next slide. The taxes are unsustainable. Here are the challenges we have. And I talk about this every single campaign cycle. Reform California is just like the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We have a campaign that is permanent 365 days a year. We never take off. We never consider it an off year. Our permanent campaign is to defeat any tax increase. Again, because there's no way you can justify a tax increase now in California because we already pay the highest taxes. The problem is that we are hamstrung. We do not have a fair fight. The first thing that we find is that instead of being able to campaign against a tax hike, we are campaigning against literally a phantom, because the politicians have changed the ballot titles on tax hikes on the ballot so that people don't know that there's a tax hike. So they will literally write a dishonest, deceptive, confusing title and summary on the tax measures. And then voters don't know that it contains a tax hike. In the gas tax repeal initiative, they didn't even say it was a repeal of the gas tax. They said it canceled road repair funds. In Prop 15 in 2020, it was a partial repeal of Prop 13 from 1978. And in that initiative, they didn't say the words tax increase or property tax assessment. They said it was the School Improvement and Community Services Initiative. I mean, just why don't you just call it the initiative to protect puppies and kittens? We are not going to have a fair fight on these tax measures until we can force the politicians to be honest about the ballot titles. And if we can get that, then we actually have a fighting chance of defeating these things. Now, I don't want to be too negative there in that we have defeated a lot of tax increases, even with false and misleading tax ballot titles. It's because we work extra hard to get the truth out there. Prop 15, by the way, we defeated it. Sadly, in that same election, Prop 19, which had an equally deceptive ballot title, it was not defeated. So if we can change the ballot titles to be honest, that's, I think, literally half the battle. The other half of the battle is money in the media. The media refuses to be honest. They are in the tank for the tax raisers at the state and local level. They are basically a bunch of cheerleaders saying that government is poor and government needs the money. And if we don't raise our taxes, then the firefighters and the police and the schools will all be worse off. Of course, the politicians are then able, on top of their liberal media friends, to buy media TV ads with a bunch of money from special interests in terms of campaign funds. And then finally, we have bad liberal judges. These liberal judges have done everything they could, hook and crook, to open up Prop 13, Prop 218, Prop 26, to weaken voter-approved tax reform measures. And so the result of that has been in a 2020 misleading and flawed court ruling, a judge said that special taxes at the local level could be imposed by a simple majority vote versus 2/3 vote. And that was a devastating ruling because it lowered the threshold for taxes to be approved. We have been very careful with the Taxpayer Protection Initiative to write the language in a very sharp, a very clear, explicit way to guard against judges coming back and trying to weaken this initiative. So these are the three things we're dealing with in our initiative. We believe will address these three issues. Next slide. So what does it require? It is powerful. And this is why the politicians hate it so much. We're throwing the kitchen sink at them, baby. We are going after all the little deceptive things that they do. First, it requires, and this is a constitutional amendment, by the way. This is not just a simple initiative. It is a constitutional amendment, a state constitutional amendment. The California Taxpayer Protection Initiative requires a public vote on all state tax hikes. So the gas tax and car tax from 2017, it simply required a 2/3 vote of the state legislature, but not a vote of the people. And so then we had to collect signatures on our gas tax repeal initiative, and they gave us a bad title. So this would require that all tax hikes be approved by a majority vote of the people statewide. it still requires a 2/3 vote for a tax increase in the legislature for a tax increase. So it requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature, both houses, and on top of that, a public vote. This is a huge change. Second, it requires a 2/3 vote in the state legislature on all fees. This is a game changer. In the initiative, we establish a strict definition of what the term exempt charge is. And that's basically another name for the word fee. And we allow for lawsuits to be filed by anyone who is forced to pay an exempt charge or a fee if that person believes that what they're being charged is in excess of the value that they're receiving for the fee. More on that in just a minute. But it requires any change in state law which results in a taxpayer paying a new or higher tax must be adopted by 2/3. Any change in state law which results in any taxpayer paying a new or higher exempt charge / fee must be imposed by not less than 2/3 of the state legislature. So this is huge because we define the word state law not just as legislation. This includes regulations imposed by the governor or by an unelected state agency such as the California Public Utilities Commission, which jacked up our utility rates. More on that corrupt cabal in just a minute. Third, the initiative restores the 2/3 public vote threshold for local special taxes. Again, that fixes that court ruling that was flawed in 2020. Next, it requires, next slide, it requires, the initiative will require a, it will repeal any taxes or fee increases that were adopted or imposed after January 1st, 2022. They would have to then be repassed and reauthorized under our initiative requirements. This is important because any rate increases that were driven in part by special fees added to electricity or gas would be nullified. Any sort of tax increase, like in Los Angeles, they just adopted in November, a massive property tax increase when you sell your property. It's called ULA, Measure ULA. That would be overturned immediately. And we have been tracking dozens of other tax increases that would be overturned immediately when this initiative is passed. So it provides for immediate tax relief for a lot of Californians. And fifth, it reforms ballot titles. The word tax increase must now be included in the title and summary. And general taxes cannot use extra words to try to imply that the money is earmarked. More on that in a minute. Let me jump into some more specifics here. Next slide. How will the ballot titles be made honest? Section 3 of the initiative stipulates that the title and summary and ballot label or question on a tax increase must include, number 1, the type and amount of or rate of tax. Number 2, the duration of tax. Number 3, the use of revenue derived from the tax. In other words, the word tax, and the amount of tax must be in the title. Can't be buried in a cost assessment later on in the legalese. It must be in the title and the summary and the question on the ballot. This is a game changer. This is going to give the voters the honesty they've always deserved on the ballot. Also, if the proposed tax is a general tax, in other words, it's a sales tax or a property tax that goes into the city's general fund, then they may not say a tax increase for police, fire, kittens and puppies, comma, and other purposes. They cannot say that. They must only say a tax increase of 1% for 40 years, raising $40 billion for general government use, period. That's all they can say. They cannot insert any other special program to imply an earmark when an earmark is not there. By the way, no other tricks can happen. They can't put an advisory measure on the ballot at the same time saying, okay, we're going to raise a general tax to get 50% vote threshold, but in the next measure, tell the city council that you want it to go to the police. Nope, can't do that. Advisory measures will not be allowed. This is a game changer. If we could just do this, most of the tax increases in California would go down in flames, even in San Francisco. Next slide. Let's talk about those fees. What in the initiative is considered a fee? We call it an exempt charge. So an exempt charge, exempt from the tax regulations that we've imposed. Well, an exempt charge is defined in a very tight, very specific way. It's defined as actual cost to the state of providing the service or product to the payer. Now, there are some exemptions for this. A levy to promote tourism, a charge for state property, reimbursement for Medi-Cal or health plans, a charge for regulatory enforcement. However, if you add a charge onto someone's utility bill for a public purpose program and use the money to go buy energy efficient windows down the street, or to subsidize someone who doesn't want to pay their electric bill or gas bill, or to put solar panels on some government building, it is not permissible. That charge is therefore considered a tax subject to the 2/3 vote requirement. By the way, these fees would have to be imposed by the legislature by a 2/3 vote. So all of those fees that the Public Utilities Commission is sneaking onto your utility bill, now we will force the politicians to have to vote and go on record that they're going to raise our rates for some sort of extra fee that they want to impose. This is going to cause these politicians so much heartburn because they're going to be on the spot to have to look their constituents in the eye and explain why they've been imposing extra charges. Next slide. How are these utility and gas rates going to impact the campaign? I believe that, and we'll talk about this in a moment, one of our best arguments for the initiative is not just tax relief, but it's to make sure that you don't get charged more for your electricity or your gas than you absolutely have to pay. And the report that the Transparency Foundation issued recently, $4.5 billion in hidden state taxes, adding to our California utility rates. Californians pay 67.1% more for electricity and 30% more for gas than the national average. Even though the profit margin of our utility companies is lower, the rates are not set by utility companies. The rates are set by the politicians. People don't know that. We need them to know that. So how does the initiative impact the utility rates? Next slide. Well, as I mentioned, the enabling preamble to the initiative states that any new revenue shall be authorized only by a vote of the legislature and by a signature of the governor. Again, right now, the Public Utilities Commission is jacking up our utility rates based upon these unelected bureaucrats imposing these charges. More language in the initiative. Every levy, charge, or extraction of any kind imposed by state law, and state law is defined as the Public Utilities Commission, is either a tax or an exempt charge. So you're no longer a utility charge. It is either going to be a tax or it's going to be an exempt charge. All revenue to the state has to be that way. An exempt charge is the actual cost of the state to provide a service directly to the individual payer. Even if the utility company collects the money, it does not absolve the state government from complying because we include payment to a non-governmental entity. And that whether the utility collects it or not is not a factor in determining whether the charge is exempt. State law is defined as any regulatory agency action, and whatever ruling they make, if it results in a taxpayer paying a new or higher exempt charge, that then must go back to the legislature for a vote of the state legislature. And by the way, with any dispute, a taxpayer can sue, class action lawsuits if necessary, and the state of California would then bear the burden of proving with clear and convincing evidence that the charge is an exempt charge. This is big. We're onto their scam, and that's why they're going to throw the kitchen sink at us to try to defeat this. So let's talk about the campaign. Next slide. Key message points I urge you to convey to voters when talking about the initiative is number one, California's cost of living is just too damn high, and that taxes are a major reason why. Car tax, gas tax, utility rates are all set by the government and taxed. Hidden taxes, direct taxes, indirect taxes. We need to stop the cost of living explosion in our state. Vote yes on this initiative. Number two, it's not just what you're currently paying. They're going to come after you with a mileage tax. And I think the mileage tax is perhaps our best argument in explaining what's about to happen, and that this initiative would block a mileage tax from happening without a vote of the people. Number three, we need to roll back taxes that you're already paying on your utility bills and your property tax assessments, anything adopted after January 1st, 2022. And number four, we deserve you to be given the truth when you're voting on something. No more deception, no more confusion. Let the voters decide what's going on the ballot based upon honest titles. These message points are the winning message points. Giving examples like utility rates and the mileage tax, very powerful. Talking about the gas tax and the car tax that they're already paying, very powerful. And so this is what our messaging must be. The other side's going to say that this is going to choke government off from revenues. You people in government have more than enough of our money. You are liars, cheats, and thieves. You keep threatening us and lying to us to get more of our money, and we're going to turn the spigot off for a while. And look, nothing in this initiative prevents voters from approving tax increases. There's a transparent and accountable process for that to happen. But we don't want things happening through theft or through deception and dishonesty to the voters. Next slide. Our campaign is going to be aggressive because we're up against a big challenge. Politicians are going to spend millions against us. They already have raised the money from the government union bosses and all these other rent seekers, these special interest groups that are getting a lot of that utility money being charged to you every single month. Second, the liberal media is going to help them have a false narrative. They'll scare voters with coverage that if this passes, that layoffs will be happening in police departments everywhere. And third, our ballot initiative, until we can fix ballot initiatives and give them honest titles, you're damn right. The politicians have given us a bad ballot title already. In fact, here it is. Let me share it with you. Next slide. Our ballot title is, quote, limits ability of voters in state and local governments to raise revenues for government services. You can't get more pejorative of that than that. They poll tested this. Limits ability of voters. This doesn't limit the ability of voters to do anything. It actually empowers voters. We are limiting state and local politicians from raising taxes or imposing inappropriate fees on ratepayers. So this is our ballot title. It's not fun. But remember, we won in Prop 15 in 2020 with a bad ballot. I would argue we had a worse ballot title in 2020 with Prop 15. So I believe we can win. It's going to take a lot, though. So let's talk about what it's going to take. Next slide. Number one, we need volunteers. In Prop 15, the business community did spend a lot of money on TV ads, but those ads didn't finish the job. They only moved it so far. I believe our plain English voter guide being distributed door to door by volunteers, that was the deciding edge in winning in defeating that campaign, that tax hike. And we came from behind. It showed that the voters, when they sat down to make their decision, originally in the polling, it showed they were leaning towards the measure, but by the time that they sat down to actually fill out their ballot, that one of our volunteers were able to get them the information they needed with a ballot guide. And a lot of voters, they seek out the information. We just got to get the volunteers out there to make sure that that information is readily available through the delivery of door hangers and other ads in person and online. Second, we do need to raise money. And the way Reform California is able to defeat tax hikes is we start way, way out and we slowly raise our funds. The average contribution per supporter per year is $67 to Reform California. We have no fundraising commission. We use no fundraising consultants. We have no campaign consultants. 100% of the money goes into the fights against tax hikes to reform our state. And so we are starting now by asking people, I know the election's in November 2020, but if we wait to ask you for your $25 in October of 2024, it's never going to be enough to win. But if we start now and you slowly chip in little by little, $25 per hit, we are able to then raise that war chest. And so our goal is to make sure that by September that we have most of our campaign budget on hand to actually get the ads that we need out there and to deploy our volunteers with the door hangers that they need. And then finally, integration. We will not win just with our own ads. We have to get a coalition built of candidates in every district. And that's why I'm going to ask the congressional candidate to endorse our measure, the state Senate and state assembly candidate to endorse the measure, city council, dog catcher, mosquito abatement board. I don't care what you're running for. You need to go on record in favor or opposed to our measure, because we want the voters to know where you stand. Do you want to raise their taxes, or do you want to protect them from high cost of living? And my hope is that these candidates will then make this a core issue in their campaign. We saw this with Prop 13 in 1978. I do believe that we can see this again in 2024. So all these candidates talking about our initiative will help create an echo chamber of awareness about the initiative and how it can help. Next slide. Our campaign website is up and running, and there are a number of things you can do on that website. The website is stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. Stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. I need you to sign up to volunteer. Please share the page immediately today with your friends. There is information on that site. It not only has the information on the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative, but it also has stories about the latest tax increases that Sacramento politicians are trying to pass, local politicians are trying to impose. We have material on that site about the mileage tax, the utility rate taxes. So there's a lot of news on there that a lot of voters are not aware of, and they can access that through the website stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. That's why we ask you to share the page with your friends. We have upcoming town halls happening. So at the end of this month, we're kicking off the Reform California 2024 campaign. We've got March 18th, I believe. Well, tonight in Poway, we have a forum, Poway, California, a forum for opposing the mileage tax, where we will talk about the California Taxpayer Initiative. We've got another mileage tax forum in Central San Diego on March 7th. Then we're in Riverside on March 18th for a town hall. Then we're in Laguna Niguel at the end of March for our Orange County town hall. We've got a number of town halls that are virtual, like this one coming up statewide. So invite your friends to those events, because then they will be able to ask questions and hear more about, how the politicians are trying to raise taxes across the board. And yes, please contribute at stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. By contributing at that link there, it goes into a dedicated tax opposition fund. So we know that anyone who donates on this site, that money has to be spent opposing our tax hikes in the state of California and passing the California Taxpayer Protection Initiative. So let's transition now to questions. To ask a question, you can raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we will call on you to ask your question. All you have to do is unmute your microphone. If you're on a phone, just hit *9 and raise your hand. When you hear a tone, you've been called on. You also can ask questions in the chat box. Dylan, while you bring up our first raised hand, I'm going to go through some of the chats. First question is this bipartisan? Yes, it is. We are not doing Republican, Democrat. Although there's a lot of Republicans that are going to, support us, and I appreciate that. But there are also some Republicans. Who's that guy out in Palm Desert? Dana Reed, I guess. He's a big tax raiser. He's a Republican. I don't know why. So every once in a while, you find a broken clock. So you've got to, know that this is not a partisan issue. There may be some Democrats that will support us because they know, the voters deserve a protection initiative like this. So we do not start out from a partisan standpoint, but you may find that the politicians are breaking down by party label, and that's just kind of how things are. Okay, Richard Michael says, if not covered by the end, what is Reform California's plan regarding the current opposition effort to get resolutions to oppose it from local government agencies around the state as we speak? Thank you for this question. Our opponents, the politicians, are using taxpayer funds to try to campaign in opposition to our measure. The League of California Cities, the California County Association, all of these groups are trying to pass resolutions at the city and county level, urging the voters to vote against our initiative. This is, it's just abusive that they're using taxpayer money to campaign. And so we urge you to let us know when that's happening. We urge you to show up and oppose the politicians that are voting on these resolutions. Let us know when they do vote, because we want their names. We want them to be in the Hall of Shame. We want them to know that they've lost our endorsement for their reelect. Dana Reed, I'm looking at you out there in Palm Desert. That we want to know who are the so-called limited government politicians who are then turning around and voting and against taxpayers. So we do need to know that. Dylan, do you have someone that wants to ask a question using the system?
Yes, I have Frank Solomon. Frank?
Go ahead, Frank. Unmute yourself and ask your question. Go ahead, Frank. Frank, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Carl, thank you so much. This sounds almost too good to be true. But I was wondering, does Reform California plan to work with other conservative media in California? For example, John and Ken broadcast from KFI 640 in Los Angeles. It sounds like they would support this initiative.
John and Ken, I'm good friends with them. They helped us with the signature drive. We got 1.4 million signatures to get this on the ballot. They were very helpful in getting the word out. And we will continue to be on their show. I mean, they're great partners in this. They're very big supporters of this. I've been on a couple times just to let people know that we qualified, we got it on the ballot, and that now we have to move forward with the passage campaign.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next question from the chat box. Please raise your hand if you want to get on the video side of the presentation. TPGA is just more words on paper. The laws for ballot labels already exist. How will they change anything? Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, we actually impose rules on how the ballot titles are to be written. So it does change things substantially. The only language we have right now in the state constitution on ballot titles is that the attorney general gets to call the shots. And the courts have backed the attorney general. That's because the Constitution says it that way. We change the Constitution, and that means the state constitution will now will overturn any politician trying to deceive voters with these titles. Larry Old says, will the presentation be available? Yes. Larry, at the end of this presentation, give us about 30 to 40 minutes. Actually, give us till tomorrow morning. We will post the presentation tomorrow morning at the website, stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. Let's see here. Deanna says, what was Prop 15 about? It was a property tax increase that partially repealed Prop 13. We defeated it. It was on 2020's ballot. Martin says, can you use screenshots from the presentation? Yes, but please just go and link to the presentation tomorrow so that people can see the whole thing. Core turnout in 2022. You previously hinted you might propose another initiative. What's the status of that? Yes, that's our voter ID initiative. We are looking at that. We have a town hall at reformcalifornia.org. Click under events on that voter ID initiative next week. We will be updating people on that important effort. Guy says, can we do anything to repeal or change the deceptive title that was given to this measure? Our partners at Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association are looking at a legal case for challenging the ballot title. And so we're working with our lawyers. We have to assume, though, that this title is going to stick. So let's plan for the worst. Let's hope for the best. But we will be looking at that going forward. I've got some questions over here on the webinar chat. Dylan, do you have any additional questions of people raising hands? Dylan, I can't hear you.
Sorry, there we go. Let's see. I have Ray Joseph. Ray, you should be allowed to unmute yourself now.
Yes,
Ray, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was following Prop 19 quite closely when they were putting that through, because the one thing I wanted to do in my life was let my son inherit my house and be able to have the property tax basis so that way he could afford to keep this home. And Jeffrey Prang, who's the LA County assessor, he was doing a lot of webinars and whatnot after it passed. And the thing that really shocked me is that they haven't written the law on it yet. I'm going, well, they just passed it.
Yeah.
And so they got to reinterpret how they chose, and they hid things in there. For example, in the actual ballot measure, it said, you know, something about trust fund babies. What kind of legal language is trust fund babies? And they hit a huge tax hike in there. So now this is forcing the sale of properties. And so when families inherit properties, it's absolutely awful that they're going to lose some of these family properties. And if you look at what happens, for example, if a family owns a couple of small commercial properties, right, that small businesses are running, now they're going to get a huge tax hit when those properties are sold, and now the property taxes go up and the rents go up. It's going to be outrageous. And it doesn't hurt big corporations because their taxes will never go up because they never die. But I just found the deceptiveness of all this is just awful. And this is one of the things that you guys could really do a great job of pointing out these deceptions would be great.
Oh, believe me, if I had a nickel for every time I had to combat a lie from a politician or a liberal media outlet, we would be able to bankroll these campaigns overnight. The problem is that we are not dealing with people who have any honor. I just can't sugarcoat this. These politicians have been liars, cheats, and thieves, and they've been able to get our money. And they continue to promise things, and then they turn around and never deliver on their promises. And as a result, we literally have working families who are not able to afford to live in California, and they have to flee. That's outrageous.
And the other thing is if you look, the other thing I've noticed in observation is the day after the election, then the news tells you what all the ballot initiatives are about, because they have a conflict of interest because they want the ad revenue.
Oh, believe me, yeah, the Union Tribune here in San Diego sat there and did not cover the fact that we had a garbage tax on the ballot that was horrifically misleading on the ballot title. Didn't even mention the word garbage tax. And then after the election, they did an editorial on it. Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Again, this is corruption. The paper's not going to inform the voters, but they do the stories after the election so they can say, oh, we covered the story, not in time for it to help a voter get the truth about what they were voting on. And you know what? Voters shouldn't have to, get translators to figure out what the hell's on the ballot. The voter should be given an honest, simple description of what they're voting on, and then let them make a decision. I think there's a lot of Democrat voters who are joining us in this fight because they're so frustrated with the deceptive nature of those ballot titles. So I appreciate your questions, and I agree with you on the Prop 19 scam. Albert says, I'm a former utility billing manager at SoCal Ed. I agree about the hidden fees needing more disclosure. Will the initiative include city taxes, which are often sneaked in without approvals? Yes, it does include city taxes. The initiative covers any sort of charge that the city would try to impose or a tax on a utility company or any individual or entity at that point. There are actually two sections, one that deals with language for the state taxes, one that deals with city taxes. So it applies to both. Question from Jeff Wedge says, will these reforms show up in a single ballot proposition or multiple propositions? Jeff, these are all in one initiative because all of these changes occur and relate to taxation. So we have a single subject. How do we reform and make taxes more transparent and accountable? And that's why we are in one initiative, not multiple initiatives. Wendy says, how are we going to make sure the state follows the new initiative once it's passed? We've put in place two things. Number one, the language of the initiative is very, very clear and very deliberate. Number two, voters, because this is a constitutional amendment, will be able to sue based upon non-compliance to the initiative. So we feel pretty good about being able to enforce it. Other questions, Dylan, on your end from the Zoom platform?
No one else currently raising their hand.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining us. The next step is we need you to be active. If we just simply let this evolve, we probably won't pass the initiative. But if we actually put together a grassroots campaign and get at least a minimum amount of funding for the ads, and we build it up slowly between now and November 2024, this can be done. We're using the same playbook that was used in Prop 13 in 1978. And remember, Prop 13 did not have institutional support. It took a grassroots rebellion of taxpayers. So please go online to stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. stopcaliforniataxhikes.com. Contribute, sign up to volunteer, share the website. There's also a petition on there that people can sign in your neighborhood to register their support for our initiative. Thank you so much, and we are happy to take additional questions at the email info@reformcalifornia.org.